I'm now joined with Professor Lance Hoffman, Director of Cybersecurity Policy and Research Institute at George Washington University. Professor Lance, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So I've actually been your student 15 years ago and took a course called Computer Security. And the world has changed ever since. So could you tell us a little bit about the new programs that we have at George Washington?
We have several new programs at GW, and where do I begin? Well, for one thing, you now can you don't have to take a complete degree program. If you want, you can just take a certificate. For example, the certificate in cybersecurity, it's 4 courses. That's one thing. That's typically for working professionals and people like that, maybe for career changers. Since you were there, we have a program, you can get a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science with a specialty in cybersecurity. For master's students, we have a complete master's. There's a master's in cybersecurity in computer science. There are also a number of other programs around the university because cybersecurity is very interdisciplinary. It's cross-disciplinary. So it doesn't take only science, only math. You have to know a little bit of psychology, a little bit of economics, risk analysis, all sorts of things. So things have changed, opened up quite a bit. For example, we have students who are on government scholarships from 10 different departments in 4 different schools around the university. And right now I'm looking at more applications. We may get 2 additional schools, so you can imagine, it used to be only engineering.
Right.
Now it's engineering, public policy, business, forensic sciences, medical school, law school. I'm sure I'm leaving out somebody, but you get the idea.
Right. So I guess a lot of these different schools and students from these different schools are seeing the value of risk and how to mitigate that in their real business lives now.
That's right. They're having to deal with it for their business products and services they're producing. A medical device now, you ought to be thinking about putting in some cybersecurity, because if not, it may be recalled at some time.
Right, because everything is now being connected. This thing called Internet of Things is really connecting us all in unfathomable ways. So we have sensors and devices, our business data is out there. Do you see a lot of the firms, both in the public sector as well as the private sector, coming and asking for help from the university?
They're asking for help. A lot of them are just waking up to it, to tell you the truth. A lot of them are saying, well, then I'll get there when we have the Internet of Things truly ubiquitous and everything is connected to everything else, then I'll deal with it. Because often I find organizations, businesses and other organizations are driven by short-term results, short-term profits or whatever, but that can be penny wise and pound foolish in terms of planning for the long term and sustainability of the enterprise, because somebody can come in later and build something and it's in essence equivalent to yours, but it has some privacy and security built in.
Right.
For example, what if, take an example, Target had put in security as maybe they should have a couple of years ago before the famous Target breach, then they wouldn't be paying the price now.
Right, and it's also hitting their brand pretty much, right?
My wife said, why should I go to Target?
Right. So what does GW have to offer in addition to the programs that you talked about? There's a lot of work happening probably on the research front.
There's a lot of work on the research front. Again, where do I stop talking?
Right.
But let me try to just a few. Okay, there's typical, traditional ongoing research in cryptography, in cybersecurity hardware, which is a very interesting area now because we have to protect it all levels. We have to protect the hardware, have to protect the software. There's research. We have a project going on now. It's not only technical. We have a project going on. It's called Building Trust, Rebuilding Trust, because after especially the Snowden revelations, a lot of people don't know who to trust. Don't trust the United States. Don't trust anybody. Where would you like to buy your computer, in the United States, in China, and somewhere else?
Right.
So we have some efforts going on with the Germans, for example. We have another project that's about to start. I believe it's not, I'll say it as if it's announced, we can cut it out later. But we have another project going on with Pakistanis and Indians, and they're working with each other.
Wow, okay.
On this. And so because there's got to be a certain element of trust throughout the world, because cybersecurity is it's not only cross-disciplinary, it's international. And the question really comes down to, are you going to have a bunch of different regimes, different protocols that's going to be probably detrimental to world commerce and world understanding. If everything has to interoperate, how do you do that? What are the lessons we can learn from the past, and what do we have to invent anew?
So what are your thoughts on the new agency that that President Obama has proposed?
Well, first of all, keep in mind that this may be seen for 2 years, so it won't be new by then.
Right.
Okay, but having said that,
It's been on a lot of
I know you
discussions,
can edit
right?
that out. It has been
Yeah.
in a lot of discussions. I think we're going to see maybe a 5-year shaking out period
Okay.
of this data fusion, intelligence sharing, and that sort of thing. I don't have a fixed opinion on it. I was actually just on a conference call this morning about that, and there is a need for it. However, some people have said that's a Band-Aid on the problem. That doesn't solve the real problem of how do you build trust into systems, and how do you do that by building systems that are secure enough?
Right.
And even and there's another question, do you even want to do that? This is where our international relations people come in. We have a couple of students studying international affairs and national security studies, because maybe you don't want to build trust into systems.
Right.
But where do you draw the line, and who's you, who's in control? These are fascinating questions, and they have a technical component and a political component, a managerial component. That's why they're so much fun.
So also I see that there's a lot of investments being made now that we have had Home Depot and Sony Pictures and Target and so on and so forth. A lot of attacks on the federal government itself.
Right.
So what is the forecast from your view for students who are now going through the training and the education for cybersecurity? What sort of future do you see in America for those sorts of students?
Well, I have had no problems in the last couple of years placing my students. As you know, we run in my case, I'm responsible for one small scholarship program. We have 100% placement.
Right.
But in general, I don't see a problem. There can be a problem for international students who want to stay in the U.S. and that sort of thing, depending on who their employer is, whether they're going to work for the government or somebody else. But certainly in the world, there is going to be there is no lack of jobs in cybersecurity.
Right.
It's a great field to be in. And by the way, not only technically, it's a great field to be in technically, but it's also a great field to be in managerially, right, because there are a lot of businesses and world organizations that have managers who are basically clueless about this. And they'd rather have somebody come on and help them out.
So with your decades of experience in this very, very fascinating field, as you look forward and you have to forecast on what sorts of cybersecurity threats are you most worried about?
Well, I'm most worried about critical infrastructure threats, where an actor, whether it's a state or a sub-state actor even, takes down a large portion of our grid or something like that, because we've been getting better at defending, but cybersecurity is very interesting. You have to play defense, you have to be good all the time.
Right.
To play offense, you only need to get one touchdown pass, and you're done, and maybe you have a whole part of the critical infrastructure down for several days. That's scary.
So talking about not being always on the defensive, what are the new technology trends that you see that's going to really shape the future of the security of our critical infrastructure, for example?
Well, there's both short-term and long-term. Short-term, I think we're stuck playing defense. It's just the way it is.
Right.
Oh, and in that case, that you see the need then for surveillance and who's doing what and trying to stay ahead of the bad guys. Long-term, I frankly think we're going to have to change the architecture of computer systems. We're using an architecture that was developed in the late 1940s, basically. A
Right.
typical von Neumann machine.
Nobody thought about it
pretty
in
much.
the internet perhaps at that time.
They didn't think about
Right.
the internet. Well, maybe they did.
Maybe they did, but
And maybe for various reasons it was decided first to market. Let's get
Right.
it out there. And there's no doubt the internet has brought amazing goodness and prosperity and all sorts of great things to people.
Right.
But it comes with some downsides as well. Okay. So now maybe the time is to do, if you will, Internet 2.0 or 3.0 or however you want to count. Maybe the time has come to look at different architectures, and I know some researchers are looking at that. How do you define architectures in such a way? This is a great technical area where you can have systems which are just as capable as they are now, but they also are much more immune to attacks from hackers and that sort of thing.
Right, and so we have probably development that has to actually happen at the hardware level, the software component level, and then you also have to manage all the multiple players, when I'm talking about vendors all over the world actually developing these systems.
That's
right?
correct. And how are they going to talk to, how are the systems going to talk to each other? How are the vendors going to talk to each other? All of this. You're absolutely,
Fascinating.
it's really fascinating.
Very fascinating. Professor Lance, last question for you, for our audience. What thoughts would you want to leave for them as you look at 2014 and beyond? What do they need to be aware of and be secure?
Well, my main thoughts would be these. Cybersecurity it's a fascinating field, it's a very important field, and it's very cross-disciplinary and global, okay? So if you're educating yourself, prepare yourself to be able to talk in a number of languages, if you will, and talk to technical folks a little bit, get some technical training, get some business training, get some political training. I think it's very important to have a well-rounded education. Now, for some people, they just want to take one kind of training and that's or education and that's it. They want to do one kind of education and that's it. But in general, to really be a leader here in the decade and the century ahead, you're going to have to know many fields, and you're going to have to be have an international point of view as well.
Thank you very much, Professor Lance. It was my pleasure.
My
Thank you very
pleasure.
much.
Thank you.